on my wrist, baby, make a wish. You could sell your Rari, but you can't afford my outfit. Versace on my wrist, baby, make a wish. You could sell your Rari, but you can't afford my outfit. Versace on my wrist, baby, make a wish. You could sell your Rari, but you can't afford my outfit. Versace on my wrist, baby, make a wish. You could sell your Rari, but you can't afford my outfit. Make a wish.
Good morning everybody, and welcome back to a new episode. Today I'm going to be taking you through an entire week's worth of meal prep for myself, my wife, and for Ollie, our son. With this, every single Sunday I go through and I prep all of our meals, or at least almost all of our meals, for an entire week at a time. I'll go through and cook just about everything and get it all set up and ready to go so that we don't have to worry about cooking during the week. It saves us a lot of time. It helps us stay consistent with whatever diet or goals we currently have, and it just makes things a lot simpler for us. So this is something that we have been doing for the past 6, 8, 10 plus years in my case, and it's just kind of become a lifestyle choice at this point. So whether or not you decide to cook like this is how I do it. I'm going to share it with you so that hopefully it helps you in the future if you decide to try a week's worth of meal prep or any kind of meal prep at all. So like I said, I'm going to be cooking up the majority of our food for the week for all of our meals. Now, I'm not going to go through and prep every single meal because there are a few that we do throughout the day that don't necessarily work well for preps. Things like in the evenings I do a smoothie, and then in the mornings I do an egg and rice scramble. And usually those two things don't really prep very well. So what I'll do is I'll cook up like the rice for the morning breakfast for the egg scramble, and then I'll just do the eggs in the morning. For the smoothie, it's usually just throw it all into the blender at night, and I just kind of go through with that. So it doesn't need to be prepped. So it just kind of depends on what you're cooking as to whether or not you really want to or need to prep it. Now, I'm gonna preface the video with a question that I get asked all the time when I share my preps, and that's kind of how do I store my food, or how much do I store? Because usually people will see 30, 40, 50 meal prep containers and they'll be like, one, how do you have that much space in your fridge for all that? And two, do you store it all in the fridge at once, or do you freeze some of them? What do you do? Because usually after around 4 to 5 days, the meals tend to not necessarily go bad, but they don't taste as good when they're reheated, and they usually don't reheat very well, and just kind of they get a little bit funky after that like 5-day mark. So what I usually will do is I'll take 4 days worth of food and put it in the fridge, and then the other 3 days worth of food will go in the freezer. And then kind of around that 3rd to 4th day mark, I'll start pulling meals out of the freezer and put it in the fridge overnight so that it has time to defrost before I need it the next day. So that's just kind of how I like to store my meals. Certain things, which I'm not going to get into in this video, I have found don't really freeze and reheat well, things like fish. But again, I'm not going to be going over that in this video. We're not going to be cooking any fish. So in the future, if I decide to use that, I'll kind of cover how I do it. But for right now, we're not going to worry about it. Today, we're going to be going through and cooking up a bunch of chicken, rice, potatoes, turkey, and then a bunch of like little meals for my son, just kind of a few different things, and I'll do that towards the end. But for right now, we're gonna start things off just kind of how I usually like to start, and that's gonna be with the chicken. Usually what I like to do is I like to clean and cut my chicken, just kind of get rid of any excess fat, things like that on there, any weird things, and I'll go through and I'll separate it out based on my meals versus my wife's meals, and then maybe separate that from Ollie's meals. But for the most part, I usually combine Ollie's and Kate's together so that I have just kind of 2 nice big bags of chicken that I can go through and start marinating. And this is why I like to start with the chicken, is so that I can get it marinating right away. That way, by the time I'm ready to start cooking it, it's been sitting for around 2, maybe 3 hours, depending on what else I'm cooking, and it's absorbed a lot of that marinade and flavor. And then the other reason that I like to separate out mine from my wife's and Ollie's is because I like to season them a little bit differently. Now, depending on how many meals you're cooking here, you could do a different type of chicken for each meal. Specifically for me, I have 2 chicken meals per day. My wife also has 2 chicken meals per day. So you could, if you really wanted to, go through and separate it out into 4 different bags or groups of chicken, one for each specific meal, and then do like a different flavor or a different seasoning, a different marinade, whatever for each meal. But like I said, for me, I usually will just throw them all into one, because I don't mind having the same chicken multiple times a day, every single day of the week. It's just kind of one of those things for me. It doesn't make a huge difference, especially if I'm in like a specific diet or prep mode, which is like I currently am. It just doesn't bother me as long as I season it well. So for mine, it's going to be a little bit more of like a spicy taco seasoning. That's kind of what I like to do right now. The seasoning or the rub, whatever, doesn't really make a huge difference as long as it doesn't have sugar in it. So the vast majority of rubs and seasonings out there will be fine. You just gotta look at the ingredients and make sure that they don't have extra carbs and sugars and things like that in them. For the most part, everything else will be fine. We don't need to worry about tracking it, anything like that. And currently, I'm also not worrying about sodium intake. As long as I'm hitting between 1.5 to 2 gallons of water per day, I'm not worried at all about my sodium intake. For my wife, she doesn't like things very spicy, so for her, she's gonna get more of a like herb Italian blend kind of spice seasoning. And then what I usually like to do with these is, once I've got all the dry rubs added, I'll go through and I'll use chicken stock in order to kind of help mix it up and add to the marinade itself. This is just something that I found works really well, helps to flavor the chicken a little bit more, helps keep it moist and juicy when it's cooking. I've seen people, I've actually tried in the past, and I've seen people recommend using things like pickle juice, and I've done that in the past. It works really well, but you gotta be careful with how much you use so that it doesn't absorb, so that the chicken doesn't absorb too much of it and become overpowered by that kind of pickle taste. So yeah, just kind of play around with whatever seasonings and marinades you like, as long as they are 0 calorie. Next up, I'm gonna go through and I'm gonna start cooking the rice. Now for us, we go through a ton of rice, usually anywhere from 5 to 6 or 7 pounds of rice per week. It's our primary source of carbohydrates, and it's just kind of something that we really like. It's very easy to digest, it's simple, it's filling, and it's just one of our main staples in our diets. With cooking rice, I highly recommend you invest in a rice cooker. Ours, we just got off of Amazon. If I can find it, I'll link it down below. But it's a 10-cup rice cooker. And I actually almost wish we had a second one, just with how much rice I go through and cook. It would really help to kind of speed up the process. But basically what I go through and do is, I've actually found out with my specific rice cooker, the maximum amount of rice that I can cook at one time is going to be 1,500 grams. Now for today, I've gone through and I've already calculated out exactly how much rice I need between my wife and I's meals, and we need 2,240 grams. So what I'm gonna do is, instead of going like 1,500 grams and then like 740 grams in another container, I'm actually gonna go through and cook up, or to split it evenly and cook up 2 separate batches that are pretty much even with the rice. So with this, you may see this debate all the time online. Should I wash my rice? Should I not wash my rice? How much water should I add? Yada, yada, yada. I personally have always, and kind of stand by the fact, to wash your rice. It just makes sure that it's clean. I used to live in Hawaii, and a big issue that we used to have there, if you didn't have your rice properly stored, would be sugar ants getting into it. So you'd usually be going through, if you didn't wash your rice and they did get into it, you'd kind of be looking through and you'd see these little black specks after it's been cooked, and it's like, ooh, extra protein. Yay. But no, I usually go through, I rinse my rice out 2 to 3 times until the water is fairly clear, and then I use the old thumb trick for measuring out how much water I need. So basically, you can see here, I take and I place my thumb at the very top of the rice. So I get it as level as possible in the container. I touch my thumb to the top of the rice, and then I fill it up to just above the knuckle of my thumb. And this has worked for me for years now in order to get the perfect amount of water to rice ratio. I don't deal with measuring cups, I don't deal with any of that, weights, anything like that for water. Just use the good old thumb rule just above the first knuckle, and that will work 99% of the time, unless you've got abnormally weird small thumbs. So Sorry about that if you do. But yeah, that's how I go through and I'll actually measure out my rice, throw it in the rice cooker, set it on white rice. We're using white rice today, and I just let it go. Next up, I'm gonna go through and I'm actually going to start prepping the potatoes. So with the potatoes, pretty simple process. I like to go through and it kind of depends from week to week how I'm cooking them. This week, I'm just gonna be doing them into strips, kind of like fries. So I go through, get them all cut up, ready to go. I get a pan prepped for the oven. I preheat the oven to about 400 degrees. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm actually going to spray the bottom of the pan and season the pan itself. This just kind of helps once the potatoes are on the pan to ensure that they're thoroughly coated. Again, with whatever seasonings you decide to use here, just make sure that it's a 0-calorie seasoning, no sugars, anything like that. And again, I'm not too worried about sodium intake at all. For this specifically, I'm gonna be using some garlic powder, garlic salt, and then a little bit of pepper. So kind of a salty, peppery garlic potato blend here. And then I'll throw these into the oven, let them cook for about 40 minutes. Maybe at about the 30-minute mark, I'll go through, flip them, kind of mix them up a little bit, make sure that the seasoning is kind of evenly distributed on them, and then pop them back in until they're done. Now, once I've got the potatoes in the oven, usually what I like to do next is I like to go through and actually prep my green beans. So using pretty much the same exact process, I'll go through, get some green beans thrown onto a pan, season them up exactly the same, and I'll toss them in the oven at the same time. With my green beans, I get them from Costco. They're pre-cooked. They come in a giant freezer bag, and I basically just go through and measure them out based on how much I need. You don't necessarily have to measure them if you really don't want to. You also don't have to cook them. They're pre-cooked, they're steamed, so you can just throw them directly into your meals like you'll see later once I get to my wife's meals. But I usually like to cook them just to kind of, again, add a little bit more flavor to them. Veggies are something that I really tend to try and flavor as much as I can because I'm not a huge fan of certain veggies, especially when I'm eating them in bulk. So yeah, I'll get these into the oven and I'll just let them cook for the same amount of time as I'm doing the potatoes, and just kind of same process. Once they hit about the 30-minute mark, I'll pull them out, mix them all up, make sure that they're cooking evenly, get the seasoning a little bit more evenly distributed on them, and then pop them back in for the remainder of the time. Now, once I've got that finished, next up on my list is going to be the turkey. For the turkey, pretty simple process here. It's just going to be a taco seasoning that I get from Costco. You saw this on the chicken for the marinade earlier, at least for mine. I usually like to use a bunch of this in my prep. It's kind of one of my favorite seasonings. It's super easy to use, tastes really good. It does have a little bit higher sodium intake, so if you are watching your sodium intake, then you kind of have to be careful about it. But for the most part, it's super good, and I just like to use it a lot. So I'm gonna go through and add this into both of our turkeys. Something else that I will do for my turkey specifically is I like to add in a little bit of chili powder and some red chili flakes. A bit of a tongue twister. And I'll add that to mine because I like my food to have a little bit of a kick to it. Now, usually around this time, the first batch of rice is finished, so I'm gonna pull it out of the rice cooker, make sure that I don't set it directly onto the counter or anything, and then we're gonna get the second batch going. Same exact process as the first batch, just get it started. And then usually from here, what I'll actually do is I will go through and I'll start actually weighing out the rice and separating it out into meal prep containers. Now, how you do this is entirely up to you. It depends a little bit on how much rice you're cooking. But the way that I always cook food, the way that I always measure food is I start with the raw or dry weight. So let's take the rice as an example. I had 1,120 grams of rice starting out with this one container. Once I've added the water to it, again, you saw my thumb measurement. It's not very accurate. I don't know exactly how much water is in there, but what I do is I'll take the entire thing of rice, throw it onto my scale, and I'll get a number. Whatever that number is, usually it's gonna be around like 3,300, 3,400 grams, including the weight of the container. Now, personally, I've used these containers so much that I know they weigh about 450 grams. So I'm gonna subtract that immediately from the total weight, and that's gonna leave me with somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,800 to 2,700 grams. And that's gonna be the total cooked weight of the rice. I'll take that cooked weight and I'll divide it by the dry weight, so my initial weight. And that'll usually give me a number around 2.2 to 2.3, maybe up to 2.4, depending on how much water I actually added to the rice. And that's going to be the number that I multiply by how many grams I've set out for each meal. So I know that that's complicated. It's a very long way of saying, take my dry weight, take my cooked weight, divide the cooked weight by the dry weight. That gives you a number that you can determine how much you need for each meal. Now, another way that you can do it is take your cooked weight and divide it by the number of servings that you cooked. But for me, this is the way I've done it. This is the way I continue to do it, and it's the way that works best for me. Same kind of principle applies to any of the other meats that I cook. So chicken, I've got my raw weight. That's what I always base all of my measurements on. I've got my raw weight, whatever I input into like MyFitnessPal, which is what I use to track my meals. Say I'm doing 5 ounces per meal. I go through raw weight of 5 ounces. Once I've cooked everything up, I take whatever that cooked weight is, again, divide it by my raw weight, and that gives me a number that I can use to multiply by however many servings I need, or that I can use to multiply by however many ounces I need. It's a kind of complicated process, but in my opinion and in my experience over the past 8-10 years of doing this, it's the most accurate way of getting a solid measurement. Now again, however you want to do it, doesn't really matter as long as you stay consistent. Don't go 1 week and do everything based off of dry weight, raw weight, uncooked weight, whatever it may be, and then the next week go based off of cooked weight. Whatever you're going to do for your measurements, for your weights, for separating out into meals, stick to that. That is the biggest thing. As long as you are consistent with how you do it, you're going to see progress as long as you're staying consistent. So that's the biggest key that I can say is don't necessarily worry about how I do it. Don't try to copy me unless you really want to. The way you have been doing it, stay consistent with that, and that's how you're going to see progress. Picking up where we left off, by this point, I've usually got a good chunk of my meals kind of laid out. I've got the rice set up and ready to go. The stuff in the oven is usually just about finished, so I can pull that out, start dividing out the veggies into my containers as well, or usually sometimes I'll just kind of put them into a big bowl, set them off to the side and wait until I've got all of my meals ready to go. But for the potatoes, I can go through and separate those out into their own meal prep containers. And then we're gonna be ready to start adding in things like our turkey. So again, the turkey's been cooking this entire time. I go through, make sure that I stir it consistently so that it gets nice and evenly cooked. And then what I do is I go through and I separate this out into the meal prep containers that need the turkey. Now next up, this is kind of where things get a little bit crazy, is going through and doing a lot of multitasking. So while all of this is going, I'll usually also be cooking up my chicken. Now there's a lot of different ways that I like to do this. Everything from baking it in the oven to throwing it on the grill outside. But one of my favorite ways to do it is actually on this little tiny like George Foreman grill. It's not exactly a George Foreman grill, but this little tiny grill just hangs over the edge of the sink. This is one of my favorite ways to cook the chicken when I'm not using the grill outside, especially on a day like today when it has just been pouring down rain. I'm gonna be cooking all of the chicken on this little guy here. So at this point, things tend to be getting a little bit crazy. I've got like 10 different things going on at once, and I'm just kind of multitasking, going back and forth between this and that and that and this and this and that and just all kinds of stuff. I'm all over the place, but this is what kind of works for me. Biggest thing is just make sure that you're keeping an eye on whatever is actually cooking at that time so you don't let it burn. And not to mention I'm also filming all this at the same time, so it's a little bit hectic. But yeah, I'm just gonna continue going through all this process and then just start separating everything out into containers as it's finished. Another thing that I'm gonna be cooking up are a bunch of bell peppers. Now here's a quick little hack on how to actually kind of easily cut these. There's a few different ways you can do it, but this is a way that I found that works extremely well. It's super quick to cut and de-seed them, especially when you're doing a ton of them like I'm doing here. It works really well, and then you can go through and cut them up into strips, dice them up however you want to in order to cook them. For me today, I haven't decided at the time of filming this exactly how I'm going to cook them up, so you'll see that as I go through the video itself. But yeah, just keep in mind that whatever you want to do to them, just keep it consistent. and this is how I like to clean and prepare them. So yeah, that's pretty much everything for mine and my wife's meals. Usually it takes anywhere from 4 to 6 hours, depending on if I'm watching my son, if I'm trying to be as efficient as possible, so on and so forth. Around 4 to 6 hours is usually an average time for a meal prep like this. The larger variety of meals that you try to cook, of course, the more amount of time that it's going to take. So that's one of the reasons that usually we like to stick to just kind of like a couple different meals, nothing too crazy, maybe like 2 or 3 different meals. If I'm trying to prep 5 or 6 different meals every single week, then it can take an entire day and it becomes a bit of a nightmare. Now that I've finished up all of our meals, I'm gonna go through and start prepping the food for Ollie's meals for our son. So with this, I'm not gonna be separating it out into individual containers. Usually what I do is I'll take it and I'll put it into a couple big containers and then put some of those in the freezer and the others in the fridge, and then we'll just kind of separate it out and make his meals up on the day. But the biggest thing is getting it all cooked up and ready to go. So for his meals, I'm gonna be doing a few different things. First off, I've already got the chicken cooked up. You remember I did about 10 ounces worth of chicken for him. Again, half of that's gonna go into the fridge, half into the freezer. As I need it, I'll pull it out of the freezer and into the fridge so it stays as fresh as possible. Next up, I actually did up a whole bunch of potatoes while I was cooking the potatoes earlier. So that was something that I got out of the way for him while I was doing it. Now, something else for him that is really good, this is something that we actually got off of Amazon, I'll have them linked down below, are these like refillable squeezy pouch containers for different fruits, yogurts, things like that. These work extremely well as snacks, portable snacks for him throughout the week. And these are one of the best things that we have actually got for him in terms of like this kind of meal prep and everything. So what I'll usually do with these, I'm gonna do a few of them with some yogurt, a few with some applesauce, and then we've actually got we need to be giving him more veggies. So we've got some like mashed squash, baby food, basically some baby food. I'll put that into one of them as well. And yeah, it's just kind of a really quick and easy snack option for him when he's like really cranky, or if we're on the road, if we're going anywhere. They're absolutely great for traveling, anything like that. Pop them in a bag and you're good to go. So with these, again, I'll have them linked down below in the description if you want to check them out. As I said, they're great for just kind of anything you can really think of to put inside of them. So yeah, I'll usually go through, prep a few of these, throw them in the fridge, and then I'm just gonna go through and do up some watermelon for him. So nothing too fancy here. Seedless watermelon, he's never had it before, so we'll see how he does this week with it. I'm just gonna throw it into a nice big bag or a big container and put it in the fridge with everything else, and we'll just kind of play around with that this week. So yeah, that's pretty much an entire week's worth of meal prep for all of us. As I said, for the meals themselves, I'll put 4 days worth in the fridge. 3 of them go in the freezer for all of Ollie's food, at least for his like cooked food. I'll usually put them into like 2 separate containers. One will go into the fridge, one goes into the freezer. That way it doesn't sit in the fridge for too long and make sure it stays as fresh as possible. And yeah, pretty straightforward. It is a bit time consuming, but for us personally, the time that you save throughout the week having to cook, having to do anything like that, dishes, all that kind of stuff, is vastly superior to the time that it takes to just go through and cook this all in one day. It is pretty much a full day event when you go through and actually do the cooking, but like I said, to me, it is completely worth it. It makes sticking to your plan, sticking to your diet, whatever it may be, so much easier. I just really enjoy it. It works really well for us. Don't have any issues with staying consistent during the week. Don't have any issues with the monotony of having the same food day in and day out. I know a lot of people tend to hate that, so meal prep might not be the way for you. If you want to, maybe try just doing 1 meal per day. Prep just one thing. See, just go with that. Start with that and then kind of work your way up from there if you really want to try and get into it more. But yeah, that's gonna be it for this video. I know this has probably been a very long one, and I actually, as of filming this right now, I haven't even started cooking, and it is 1:15, so I really need to get going on the cooking. Right now, Ollie is currently with his grandparents. He's gonna be back probably in the next like 5 hours, so I'm gonna try and get as much of this cooking and filming and everything done as quick as possible. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. If you liked the video, go ahead and hit that like button. It definitely helps out, helps show your support for the channel. If you guys wanna see more videos like this, let me know down below in the comments section, or if you have any questions about anything, any recipes I used, anything like that, let me know and I'll try to get back to you guys. But for now, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, ring that bell, like the video, do all the YouTube things, and I will see you all in the next episode. Bye. Time to get cooking. First, I gotta eat. I am hungry. Let's go.